My name is Dileia Whitmore, and for most of my life, I was the mistake my family tried to hide. I was 28 years old when I finally learned the truth, but long before that, I was already invisible. For as long as I can remember, my parents had a favorite word for me: slow. They said it casually, like a diagnosis they had already accepted. At dinner parties, family gatherings, even birthdays, the comparison was always there because my older sister Marissa made sure of it. Marissa was everything our family valued: top grades, Ivy League, perfect posture, perfect future. I was the opposite. I had dyslexia, diagnosed when I was 7. Letters refused to stay still on the page. Sentences rearranged themselves like puzzles designed to humiliate me. Reading took effort. Writing took courage. My parents didn't see effort or courage. They saw embarrassment. While Marissa was sent to elite tutors, private music instructors, and international summer programs, I was told to try harder and stop making excuses. When I asked for help, my mother sighed as if I were draining something precious from her. "Not everyone is meant to succeed academically," she said once. I was 12. I believed her. So I adapted in silence. Audiobooks replaced textbooks. Diagrams replaced paragraphs. I learned to understand systems instead of sentences. And every Sunday, I escaped to the only place I ever felt seen: my grandmother Eleanor's apartment. She never rushed me. She never corrected me mid-sentence. She told stories instead of giving instructions. "You don't see less," she once told me, squeezing my hand. "You see differently." I didn't understand her then. At family events, I stayed quiet. At holidays, I smiled when jokes landed at my expense. At Christmas dinners, I watched my parents toast Marissa's future while barely remembering my name. One night, my father announced Marissa's full scholarship acceptance in front of 20 relatives. Applause filled the room. Cameras flashed. Pride overflowed. Then he glanced at me. "And Delia is also here." Laughter followed. Soft, polite, cruel. My sister laughed too. Under the table, my grandmother held my hand tightly. She said nothing, but her silence carried weight. That night changed something. I didn't know it yet, but it was the moment a plan began forming. A plan that would take years. A plan that would only activate when my family finally showed me who they truly were. And when that moment came, everything they built would start to crack. Because what I didn't know that night was this: my grandmother was watching everything, and she was already preparing something that would destroy the illusion my parents lived behind. After graduating from a state university in 2022, I did what I had spent my entire life doing. I tried to earn my place in a family that had never offered me one. I applied to work at Whitmore Holdings, the real estate company my grandmother had built from a single rented office decades ago. I didn't ask for a leadership role. I didn't ask for special treatment. I just wanted a chance to prove that I wasn't useless. My father agreed reluctantly. He hired me as an administrative assistant. The salary was modest, barely livable, and the position came with an unspoken rule: don't expect more. That same month, my sister Marissa joined the company not as an assistant, not as a trainee, but as chief legal advisor. With a salary that was more than 6 times mine. No one said it out loud, but the message was clear. She was the future. I was the favor. My days were filled with photocopying contracts, booking conference rooms, organizing files that no one ever read. Executives passed my desk without learning my name. Meetings happened behind the glass walls I was never invited into. But I listened, I observed, and I noticed something strange. The more I watched deals being discussed, the more patterns I began to see. Relationships between investors, money flows, weak points in contracts. While others focused on titles and signatures, I saw structures: how one decision leaned on another, how one risk echoed across an entire project. It was the same skill I'd developed as a child to survive reading. Every lunch break, I sketched diagrams in a notebook. No words, just arrows, boxes, systems. That's when I remembered what my grandmother had taught me years earlier. She used to spread out old contracts on her dining table, not to read line by line, but to understand how they breathed. "Your father reads to control," she once said. "You read to understand." In early 2019, shortly before her health declined, she called me to her apartment and handed me a small wooden box. Dark mahogany, brass hinges, heavy for its size. "Keep this safe," she told me. "Don't open it yet." I asked what was inside. She smiled, the kind of smile that carries secrets. "When the time comes, you'll know." I tucked the box into my closet and tried to forget about it. 18 months later, she passed away. Pancreatic cancer, fast, unforgiving. I was the only family member with her at the end. And still, I didn't open the box. Because I believed naively that if I stayed loyal, quiet, useful, my family would eventually see me. What I didn't realize was that they had already decided my ending, and they were about to make it official, because the next message I received wasn't an opportunity, it was a warning. And it would arrive in my inbox on a Tuesday afternoon, disguised as corporate restructuring. The email arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. No warning, no conversation, no courtesy. The subject line read, "Position restructuring confidential." I opened it once, then again, then a third time, because sometimes my eyes needed confirmation before my heart could believe what it was seeing. My position at Whitmore Holdings was being eliminated, effective in 6 weeks. HR would contact me about severance options. That was it. No acknowledgement of 2 years of loyalty, no mention of late nights or unpaid overtime. No recognition that this job was the only thing keeping a roof over my head. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen as the familiar sensation returned, the letters blurring, drifting, rearranging themselves. I forced them back into place. They were firing me. That evening, I stayed late, pretending to organize files that would never be touched again. The office emptied slowly. The lights dimmed. Voices echoed down the hall from my father's corner office. I didn't mean to listen, but thin walls make secrets careless. "We can't have her here anymore," my father said. "Note, it looks bad." My mother's voice followed, calm, measured, almost kind. "People will start asking questions." "What kind of questions?" He replied. "Why she's still an assistant, why she's never been promoted, why she's the way she is." There was a pause. Then the sentence that finally broke something inside me. "We've done everything we could," my mother said softly. "Some children just don't have what it takes." That was it. Not anger, not frustration. A verdict. I pressed my palm against the wall to steady myself. My salary barely covered rent for the small apartment I shared with 2 roommates. I had no savings, no backup plan. If I lost this job, I wouldn't just lose my dignity, I'd lose stability. But worse than the fear was the realization settling deep in my chest. If I accepted this quietly, I would be agreeing with them. I would be accepting the version of myself they had written years ago, the weak daughter, the burden, the one who didn't matter. The next day was my sister Marissa's graduation celebration, a massive event at one of the most expensive hotels in the city. Investors, board members, family, friends, hundreds of witnesses. I already knew my father would make announcements. He always did. I just didn't know that this time his announcement would erase me publicly, and that someone else had been waiting for that exact moment. Someone my grandmother had trusted. Someone holding an envelope that would change everything. Because the next night, in a ballroom filled with applause and champagne, a stranger would walk toward me and place the truth into my shaking hands. The ballroom looked like something out of a magazine. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, a live orchestra playing softly in the corner. Nearly 400 guests filled the space. Investors, executives, lawyers, distant relatives I barely recognized. This wasn't just a graduation party. It was a performance, a celebration of legacy, success, and everything my family believed mattered. I stood near the entrance, adjusting the hem of my simple black dress. It wasn't designer. It wasn't custom fitted. It was what I could afford. As people passed me in tailored suits and glittering gowns, I felt smaller with every step. Before I could find my seat, my mother intercepted me. Her eyes scanned me quickly, from my shoes to my makeup, then she smiled. Thin and practiced. "You'll be seated at table 27, she said, near the service entrance. I nodded. Then she leaned closer, her voice low. "Tonight is Marissa's night. Whatever you're feeling, keep it to yourself. Don't embarrass us." Table 27 was half hidden behind a pillar. My table mates were relatives who barely remembered my name. From where I sat, I had a clear view of the stagehand, the massive banner hanging above it. "Congratulations, Marissa Whitmore, class of 2024. At 8:30 sharp, the orchestra stopped. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. My father stepped forward, glass raised. He spoke about excellence, about legacy, about how proud he was. Applause followed every sentence. Then came the announcement. Marissa would inherit everything. The house, the assets, and eventually, the company. The room erupted. People stood. Cameras flashed. Cheers filled the air. I stayed seated. No one looked my way. A woman beside me leaned over and whispered, "So, what does that mean for you?" I didn't answer. As the applause faded, I noticed a man standing near the entrance. Silver hair, gray suit. He hadn't been celebrating. He hadn't been eating. He was watching. Our eyes met. Moments later, he walked toward me slowly. Deliberately, like someone following instructions written years ago. He stopped at my table. "Miss Whitmore," he said quietly. "My name is Jonathan Ellis." He handed me an envelope-thick paper, sealed in red wax. "I was your grandmother's attorney," he continued. "She asked me to give you this. On the day your father showed you who he really is?" My hands trembled as I took it. "What is it?" I asked. He lowered his voice. "Her will. The real one." I couldn't breathe. As he walked away, the celebration roared on behind me, but I wasn't part of it anymore. I slipped into the hallway, broke the seal, and began to read. And with every line, the life I thought I'd lost came rushing back in a way I never expected, because what my grandmother left me wasn't just money, it was control. And I had exactly 72 hours to decide whether I was brave enough to use it. I stood in the empty hallway, the sounds of celebration muffled behind thick doors, my hands shaking as I read the document again slowly, carefully forcing every word to stay in place. This wasn't a copy. This wasn't symbolic. It was a legally executed will, notarized years earlier. My grandmother had revoked every previous document, and in clear, unmistakable language. She had left majority ownership of Whitmore Holdings to me, 51%. Full voting rights. Control. My knees nearly gave out. The will didn't sugarcoat anything. It acknowledged my father's treatment of me. It stated plainly that I had been excluded not because of incompetence, but because I had never been supported. Reading those words felt like someone finally saying my name out loud after years of silence. But near the end of the document was a clause that made my stomach tighten. I had 72 hours. Within that window, I had to formally request an emergency board meeting. If I didn't, the will would be void and everything would revert to the old arrangement. I found Jonathan Ellis near the coat check. "She knew you'd hesitate," he said gently. "That's why the deadline exists." He handed me his card. A personal number was written on the back. The clock started the moment you accepted that envelope. That night, I went home to my cramped apartment and sat on my bed in the dark. The city lights bled through the window. My roommates were asleep. For the first time in years, I opened the wooden box my grandmother had given me. Inside was a handwritten letter, an old partnership agreement from the company's earliest days in a USB drive. Her letter explained everything. Years earlier, my father had tried to quietly reduce her voting power, claiming she was too old to understand modern business. The board had rejected him. She had never forgotten, and she had never forgiven how he treated me to justify his own hunger for control. The USB contained proof. The next morning, I made the hardest phone call of my life to one of the board members. My grandmother trusted, then another, and another. Not everyone agreed, but enough listened. By the second night, the emergency board request was officially filed. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday morning. When my sister called me, her voice was tight with panic. "What did you do?" she demanded. "I did my job," I said calmly. She hung up. By Friday evening, my father knew. I heard him shouting through office walls, calling it ridiculous, calling me harmless, calling me incapable. For the first time, being underestimated felt like armor. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, but because, for the first time in my life, the future was no longer something being decided for me. Because the next morning, I would walk into a boardroom where my father believed I didn't belong and leave with a power he never saw coming. The elevator doors opened onto the top floor at 9:45 a.m. Glass, marble, silence. Everything about that floor was designed to intimidate, to remind people who belonged and who didn't. I stepped out wearing a borrowed blazer that was slightly too big and holding a thin portfolio that felt heavier than it should have. At the boardroom entrance, security stopped me. "You're not on the list." Before I could respond, a familiar voice cut in behind me. "She's with me." One of the senior board members, someone my grandmother had trusted, gestured me forward. Across the hallway, my sister stood frozen, her confidence faltering for the first time I could remember. My father arrived moments later. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He smiled. That was worse. Inside the boardroom, 12 people took their seats. My father sat at the head of the table, relaxed, certain. My sister positioned herself beside him. Though she wasn't officially a board member yet, I was offered a chair at the far end. The chairman called the meeting to order and announced the agenda, a document affecting ownership and governance. My father cleared his throat and stood. "Before we waste everyone's time," he said smoothly, "I need to clarify something. My daughter is not qualified to address this board. She has no leadership experience, no legal training, and struggles academically." My sister added softly, "She has learning difficulties. This is emotional." The room shifted. I stood. "I won't be discussing my abilities," I said evenly. "I'll be discussing facts." I placed the will on the table. Jonathan Ellis confirmed its authenticity. The date, the notarization, the legal standing. My father's smile vanished. "This is manipulation," he snapped. My mother was not in her right mind. I pressed play on my phone. The audio filled the room, my father's voice from years earlier, proposing to strip his own mother of her voting rights. Silence followed. The chairman removed his glasses. "Does anyone dispute the validity of this will?" he asked. No one spoke. It was official. I now held majority ownership. Then the chairman turned to me. "As majority shareholder, do you have a motion?" My father's jaw tightened. He expected revenge. Instead, I proposed a vote of confidence. Let the board decide whether he deserved to remain CEO. 7 votes against him, 4 in favor, 1 abstention. The result was final. My father didn't argue. He simply stood, looked at me, and walked out. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one leaving the room. But power doesn't end conflict, it exposes it, and outside that boardroom, my family was waiting. With words that would finally break the illusion of who we were, my father caught up with me in the private corridor outside the boardroom. My mother was with him. Someone must have called her during the meeting. Her mascara had smudged. Her composure finally cracked, but her voice still carried accusation before concern. "You planned this," my father said, gripping my arm. "You humiliated us." I pulled free, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "I told the truth. That's not humiliation, that's consequence." My mother stepped forward, hands trembling. "Delia, sweetheart, you have to understand. We were protecting you. You've always struggled. We didn't want you to fail publicly." I laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because it finally made sense. "You didn't protect me," I said. "You erased me. You decided who I was before I ever had a chance to become anything else." My father's anger flared. "We will contest the will." "You won't," I replied. "And you know it. Grandma planned for everything." including this. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my mother whispered my name again, softly this time. I didn't stop walking. The elevator ride down felt endless. When the doors finally opened, the adrenaline drained from my body all at once. I leaned against the wall, shaking, not from victory, but from grief. I hadn't just taken control of a company. I had buried a lifetime of hope that my parents would someday choose me. Outside, Jonathan Ellis was waiting. That was extraordinary, he said carefully. It was necessary, I replied. Over the next few days, everything moved fast. Too fast. My father submitted his resignation within weeks. The board appointed an interim CEO. Press inquiries started circulating. Whispers turned into headlines. And suddenly, people noticed me. Executives who had never learned my name wanted meetings. Colleagues who had ignored me wanted coffee. Investors wanted reassurance. But the message that mattered most came from someone unexpected. Longtime assistant who had worked with my grandmother decades earlier. She used to talk about you all the time, the message read. She said you saw things others missed. Now I understand. 6 months later, I moved into my own apartment. Nothing extravagant, just quiet, sunlight, and space to breathe. I took on a strategic role in the company, focusing on sustainability and long-term development. The kind of future my grandmother would have wanted. My family relationship didn't magically heal, but it became honest, and that was enough. I finally understood something that had taken me nearly 3 decades to learn. My worth was never missing. It was just ignored by the wrong people, because the greatest inheritance my grandmother left me wasn't control or money, it was permission. Permission to stop waiting for approval and start choosing myself.